what is happening because of that is that the whole human rights discourse, the liberal discourse, liberal internationalism is all getting rejected. And it has good parts, it has bad parts. It has good values and it has interventionist values also. The good values are, an element of human rights, etc. So that should not get rejected. That's bad for the world. But it's getting rejected because of Israel's actions against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the way they're being supported by the regimes of the collective West, but not everyone knows they're not being supported by the mass of people who are on the streets.
Let me use this as an opportunity to maybe talk about the second subject, which is Israel-Palestine. So what is your analysis about what this conflict, horrible conflict that has cost tens of thousands of lives, 1,200 Israelis, and by now more than 15,000 Palestinians in Gaza slaughtered terribly, and the West doesn't say a word, and not only doesn't say a word, it supports Israel in bombing these people, these poorest of the poor, in a very poor part of the world that have been kept poor. How does this impact India, and where is actually the position of the Indian government at the moment and the Indian society? Can you give us any insights here?
Well, look, there's been initially, as I told you, India always supported the right of the Palestinian people to be free, to have their own state, and to coexist. India has never denied the existence of Israel. They want that both should coexist peacefully. That is their paradigm, and that's what they will support. They've supported the Palestinian cause. In fact, for example, some Palestinians told me that the Palestinian embassy in India has been paid for by the Indians. And they keep giving assistance to the Palestinian Authority. But India has a real issue about terrorism, having been victim to terrorism. And India also has a fairly right-wing regime in power, voted into power, which has certain fears, and it has a kind of an exclusivist agenda, which is evident at times, and a ethnic majoritarian agenda. But at the same time, what has come out on the issue of Israel's, the initial, for example, Hamas's terrorist attacks, was a very strong condemnation of that attack as terrorist and quiet after that. And eventually, after a few days, India reiterated that they continue to hold to their traditional policy of a two-state solution, and they would support that. And in the BRICS meetings, in the G20 meetings, at all international fora, they have supported again that there should be a cessation of hostilities immediately, that there should be they cannot go back to the past. The process for a two-state solution must begin. They conform to much of the global south. But I can tell you, as compared to South Africa, that's been so active on this, India has not taken the same kind of activist foreign policy position as South Africa has, or some of the other countries of the global south. They continue to have close relations with Israel. And in fact, I think they would also like to be mediators.
Mm-hmm.
They see themselves as that, just like they position themselves between Russia and Ukraine, where they said that it is neutral countries which should be mediators, because others they're part of the conflict. Because a lot of people in India see the US as so that Israel would not be able to continue this if the US didn't want it to.
Of course.
They can just, yes. And India is quite close to the Arab states, very close to Iran. They have a very close link with Iran also.
Can you explain that to me? Because I never researched it and I don't understand quite, because there was this traditional this issue, this conflict within India, right? And India and Pakistan that split across the religious lines, right? The Muslims, the Pakistani Muslims, and then the Hindus in India. And we know that India today, like under Modi, is very Hindu nationalist, right? But at the same time, this Hindu nationalism is nothing comparable to Jewish ethno-nationalism, right? They're completely different. Can you explain that difference to me?
Well, so you want to know about Iran and about ethno-nationalism.
Yeah.
I think there's Jewish ethno-nationalism. I mean, you're talking about Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
The state of Israel itself is Zionist because that's its constitution. Its laws distinguish between are based on ethnicity and race. It's a classic apartheid state itself, and every layer of the state is apartheid or based on this Zionism, where all structures of state privilege those from one race over that of the Palestinians. India doesn't have that at all. The Indian constitution is a plural, multinational, federal, secular constitution. They guarantee rights to all citizens. Of course, sometimes it plays out in a sense where because of majoritarianism and because of partition, because of a history of communal violence, because of a history of a tension between the two communities, and it's not always there. It's there in some areas, in some places it's curbed, and there are laws that regulate it. So if you violate it, you're actually going against the constitution and the laws. So even though we have a Hindu nationalist government who would like to give more benefits to, let's say, some communities as opposed to others, but they're also wary of the law. And in law, everything in law is equal still in India. The law hasn't changed.
But do you think Mr. Modi would like to go that route? So, but you're saying the constitution and the way India is set up at the moment prevents that from happening. But would this be a wish of Mr. Modi?
Well, I don't think fully, because I think yes, he does have his biases, which have been evident. But at the same time, he also knows how to play electoral politics. So, for example, he would like the vote, and he tried in the last election for the vote of the Muslim women by saying that he gives them, there were some customary laws which were kind of changed where Muslim women would get alimony, the right to divorce, etc. And he did win a section of them over. So at the moment, I mean, where he would go to depends on the next election, which is next year. Maybe the larger agenda is to have a state which is more Hindu in its character, more nativist. But at the same time, he's not completely, he's not part of that decolonization kind of idea at all. He fits in He wants a strategic relationship, and he wants to be respected by the Americans, by the liberals. He wants to be part of the global democracies. And what's a democracy if it doesn't respect minority rights?
Exactly.
Democracy is not just, and I think then at least the Western media should also talk about that, because they're also accepting these kind of democracies like Israel. Like those who actually believe in democracy would not like to accept an Israel-like democracy, which does not respect or does not give equal rights to its minorities. And that is why South Africa has been so active, because they feel their apartheid of Israel is much worse than what they faced in South Africa. And I hope India never goes to this path, because you see the end consequence of that path also, which can mean the dissolution of a state, because people whose rights are denied, you can kill them, but another generation will keep repeating, like the first Intifada, the second Intifada, one Nakba, the second. This is also a Nakba, a catastrophe where, and the world's consciousness has been raised on this. You can see the protest on the street, and a bloc has, with the Arab state, has been formed, which has led to this truce or humanitarian pause, and maybe an extension, and maybe a ceasefire. So that's also there. And India is supporting that. So surely they don't want to use the same policies which can lead to these kind of issues.
I think one important thing to notice is that the time when you could, through genocide, get rid of an entire population in a certain geographical area, that time has closed, and it has been closed for about 100 years, right? This is how Europeans got rid of most people in North America, in South America, Australia, and New Zealand, right? Those were massive genocides and the largest crimes in history, in my understanding. But that has ended. You can't do that anymore, and we can see how the entirety, Africa and Asia have been able to repel this kind of genocidal attempts, and South Africa again has even found a mechanism to somehow reconcile the populations that, as a matter of fact, then live in that territory. And this is what's needed in Palestine and Israel. The problem at the moment is that the settler colonial minority that holds all the weapons and has all the support of the others who give them more weapons haven't gone out of that mindset. They're still in a genocidal mindset, in my view. And my question then is, do you think that there will be a point at which even at India and other states, non-Arab states, might say, like, okay, this is it, we are going to sanction you guys, and we're going to hard sanctions the way that the West is using them? Or is this not something that will happen for India and the global South?
Well, it could happen for some, but so far, the worst periods, it didn't happen. Turkey and even Egypt or Jordan and Iran, they all spoke about it. Iran was pleading that, have some sanctions, stop the oil, and that will help ease the pain of the Palestinians and the bombing and the displacement of 1.7 million. But they didn't agree to sanctions. They didn't agree to military assistance of Hamas. What they agreed to was, they made this contact group of the Arab and Islamic states. They've been very active in diplomacy. They met Wang Yi, they met Sergei Lavrov, they met Macron, and they're going to meet all the P5 members and plead for that there should be no going back. So that's been a very interesting development. They want a ceasefire. They want open borders for humanitarian assistance and rebuilding. And they're so clear, they will not accept a genocide or a forced displacement outside their borders like there was in 1948 and later. That will be war. Even Jordan has said that. Even the US's allies have said that they're not going to take in. I mean, first, of course, it's a problem of migration. Second, they're not going to take this ethnic cleansing, which Israel is almost many people in the regime, their war cabinet is declaring that once this truce is over, they're going today. The ambassador of Israel to India said that they're going to go back to bombing as soon as the truce is over of South Gaza.
I hope not.
I hope not either. I mean, because it's painful, especially for everyone with a conscience. And what is happening because of that is that the whole human rights discourse, the liberal discourse, liberal internationalism is all getting rejected. And it has good parts, it has bad parts. It has good values and it has interventionist values also. The good values are, an element of human rights, etc. So that should not get rejected. That's bad for the world. But it's getting rejected because of Israel's actions against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the way they're being supported by the regimes of the collective West, but not everyone knows they're not being supported by the mass of people who are on the streets.
Yes. So is this event, to me, it's almost unthinkable that the collective West actually supports a genocidal regime, but it is exactly what's happening. Even countries like Switzerland have immediately condemned Hamas and have yet to say a single word of criticism on the treatment of the Palestinians. Switzerland has barely managed to raise some money. They did that, actually. They did say we give 90 billion francs to helping the Palestinians in Gaza, to the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement, which I think is a good thing to do. But they haven't condemned Israel for anything. They stay away from that, as in right to self-defense. They say right of self-defense, which is this BS term in order to justify massive slaughter, right? But does this precedent now also does this send a certain message to the developing world? Like in India, do you see that in Indian media, that this hypocrisy is now utterly clear? I mean, there's no more masquerading and hiding behind human rights, right? When you do something like this, do you think this will change the bit of the mindset of the populations in the global South?
In the global South, yes, but in India, the discourse has been that, like in the West, that Hamas is terrorist and we cannot tolerate terrorists. The problem is that in a lot of, especially regimes and this dominant media, Hamas and the Gazan and the Palestinian citizens have been collapsed as one. Palestinians as a mass are not Hamas, but they're being seen as Hamas and therefore as legitimate targets. And that is why they're saying defense, because in a war, there are collateral damage. And that's what the Palestinian people are seen as. But the reality is, the truth is that Hamas is, a radical Islamist force. Even people in the West Bank don't care for it. They don't support it. But they support a resistance against the Israeli state, which is so oppressive. So there are two parallel things, but for the convenience of evading war crimes, these are being collapsed as one. But the fact is that if you're killing 5,000 children and babies and bombing hospitals, and there's no real evidence, people from within the Jewish Voices for Peace, for example, or people from within Haaretz, etc., are exposing these crimes. So we are not collapsing all Jewish people with Israel. No, we distinguish Zionism and Jewish people. So similarly, they should also distinguish Hamas and the Palestinian people. So it should be a similarity. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. You can sanction Hamas, you can find creative ways to get rid of it, of having a new Palestinian leadership, but don't give collective or do this collective punishment of the entire people and use it as an opportunity to rid the entire region of those people and push them out, as they're saying it openly. They should all go to the Sinai, or there should be a quota system of which countries should take them. I've seen statements by ministers of the Netanyahu regime which have said Ukrainians were taken in as a quota system. Why not the Palestinians? So there are these stray statements which are hurtful overall to the global majority, to people of conscience. And that is why I think that is where I feel there is a sliver of hope, where we may not go back to business as usual, even after the truce.
I would hope so, because, although I agree with you that Hamas is not the same as the Palestinians, I do understand how Hamas develops in an environment where for 16 years you incarcerate 2.2 million people on a tiny little plot of land. You even control the caloric intake, and you make sure that they remain in the poorest of the poor condition. I do understand how under such a circumstance, plus a population where 50% are children that grow up and never know anything else, I do understand how Hamas and the idea of Hamas develops. And that's not to justify what they did. That's to explain how it happens. And if you want to suppress that, what you need is to make sure that these people have better lives. You need to make sure that Palestinians have a dignified, good life, and then nobody blows themselves up if they have a good life, except for the occasional crazy nut. There is occasional crazy nuts, but the rest, that's never a Hamas movement, the occasional crazy nuts.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and I hope this is a lesson that other countries learn. But there's another bad lesson they can learn, and that is, if you're an ally of the US, you can oppress your own people. As long as you're an ally and you have the patronage of the US, you can do what you want. That's a lesson which regimes could learn. You never know.
Although I'm not sure, because, Israel is so special. I think we need a different term, because ally doesn't quite capture it. I think we should use something like annex, because it's more like a part of the United States detached from it, that does a lot of its bidding, and they are in a symbiosis, these two. Whereas the other allies, you can see that even within NATO, that you have like various degrees of going along with the United States, to the point where the US or whoever else had the need to actually bomb some infrastructure, right, with the Nord Stream, and get rid of that stuff in order to make sure that the allies come back into the little cage, right? But Israel is on a different level of symbiosis. So the thing is, we don't have a second one of those, I think, luckily. Because it's, although we can see how Ukraine, in fact, actually had this idea, a model like Israel, right, become an annex to the United States. It's really a weird situation in world politics at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think Ukraine is comparable, because Israel, there's that Jewish lobby, and the oligarchs over there, and how they control, and AIPAC, and I don't think Ukraine would ever be comparable. Ukraine was an easy paw to weaken Russia, and I think it'll continue to be used in that way to some extent, even when the war is over. Straight terrorist attacks, militia. After all, they have lost their land and territory, and there is the civil war between the ethnic Russians, and they see them as traitors, and there's Ukrainian nationalism. So Ukraine will just be a convenient kind of small country out there to weaken Russia. But
it is. I do hope that the lesson that especially the global South will take from this is that when you're offered weapons and help from the West, say no, because you will be devastated, because it's absolutely horrible. I pray on my knees, although I'm an atheist, but I pray on my knees that Taiwan will not go that route. please do not be pushed into Chinese knives. Do not let that happen, because I know that the neocons in the US will be more than happy to pull that off again and fight a war with China in Taiwan over Taiwan and have the Taiwanese die for it. And maybe also the Japanese, actually. Although I must say the Japanese are luckily, in my view, nationalist enough that
I
they,
hope so.
yeah, they have.
Because you're right, the US is looking for proxies in our region now.
Yeah, everywhere. And somebody to push into the knives of the people they don't like. It's I don't understand how this discourse is not much clearer in the West, but I am glad to see that in India you actually have that realism to see that I mean, any kind of US help always comes with this problem that they will try to use that help they give to you in order to make you fight the wars that they want themselves.
I think one of the American senators put it very well about these proxies that they had, and where he said, we're ready, you give your bodies, we'll give our bullets. Your bodies, our bullets. So
that's a horrible trade-off. That's a horrible trade-off.
Horrible. So that's why we don't, I mean, countries should be very wary of becoming proxies like Philippines or South Korea. To some extent, maybe I don't think Japan would fall into it, but other countries can. And I don't think India is going to accept that kind of. Yeah, I hope not. Even if we have, because for example, so far we have not asked for any mediation between India and China. There have been like 18 rounds of military commanders talks. Okay, they haven't yielded to many things, but certain hotspots have been fixed and certain remain. India is using various pressure points, but they said we don't want any outside. We're capable of doing our own mediation, just like China is. They see themselves as a power like China does, and moving in a similar trajectory.
One very important difference, which I think actually will work in the favor of India and works against Japan and South Korea, is that, Japan and South Korea, together with Germany, they lost the Second World War, and US troops were never withdrawn. With the consent of these states, but these boots are still on the ground. And just as one example, this is different in Japan, but Korea, I wasn't aware that in case of a war with North Korea, the entire army of North Korea will be under joint command, which guess who's going to be the general of that? It's always a US general. So it's like the whole military structure in Korea is built around this alliance, and also in Japan, but in Japan at least not operationally, just mentally. But these countries have never been demilitarized. The US has never withdrawn its troops. India doesn't have that problem. I mean, also the Philippines, they re-invite them to go, but it's a different trajectory.
Absolutely.
Well, Anu, thank you very much for this talk and this back and forth. I very much appreciate it. And if anyone wants to read from you, where can people find your writing?
I've written recently a lot of articles in the Economic and Political Weekly, and I think I'll send you the links. There is a paywall because, for example, I wrote on this whole de-dollarization, and I keep writing in the next issue also on Palestine and Global South. But if anyone really wants it, I can send them a PDF through you, or they can just email me and I could send it. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's very nice. And you sent me the link. I will put it into the description of the video, and then they can also find you there or find your email address and write you directly. Anu, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was delightful.